Okay, Marathon 81, 2 stories, not a long video, but they're 2 really good stories. I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, here we go. Here's a story from Sean from East Texas, and here's what he writes. My story is short, but it is something my son and I will never forget. It was the weekend before Thanksgiving 2015. My son and I decided that we were going to deer hunt at my cousin's farm outside of Hallsville, Texas. He had given us permission to use his stands and come and go as we wanted. To give you a mental picture of the lay of the land, his property was divided into 3 sections. The first was where his house and cattle were, and during hunting season, the back 2 were for hunting. My cousin's stand was in the last section, about a half mile from his house. My son and I arrived about an hour before daylight and snuck down the moonlit trail to my cousin's stand. We climbed the tower and settled into the box blind on top. It was about 15 foot to the bottom of the stand. My son and I sat there quietly waiting and watching as the sun was starting to rise. This last section of land was a partial pasture that bottlenecked into woods about 300 yards away. My son and I were intently staring at the deer feeder my cousin had that is about 100 yards from the stand, trying to see if any deer were under it before it became totally light. As the light started to fill the pasture, my son and I noticed something dark walking on 2 legs cut across the very end of the bottleneck some 300 yards away. It moved from right to left. I took note in my head that this thing was really big. Then, when it got to the 5-strand barbed wire fence, it just stepped over it, not making a sound. I'm 6'3", and that fence in that spot is over waist high to me. My son and I looked at each other and said, "What was that?" The next thing we know, we hear this hair-raising scream and growl from about 100 yards away to the west of us in a thicket. We could hear it moving away very quickly. Needless to say, my son and I were both very quiet, and we readied our rifles for anything that might come our way. We sat there for 3.5 hours before we moved. During that time, we never even saw a squirrel. When we finally climbed down, we made a beeline for the Jeep. Once there, we felt safer. We drove up to my cousin's house and told him what had happened, and he laughed at us. I think he thought we were making it up. At the time of this occurrence, I was in my early 40s and have been hunting pretty much all my life. When I was younger, my father and I were hunting near Tatum, Texas, and there the woods would just go deathly quiet. I never thought it might be Bigfoot until that day with my son. I did return to the same spot the following weekend with my other son, but I waited until it was light to walk in. I don't blame you. Since this occurrence, I've been watching every YouTube video I could find, trying to find that sound. I finally found one today that was very similar on another channel. However, being from Texas, I wanted to share this story with you and your listeners. Well, thanks, Sean. I'm glad you shared it. Man, it's a good story. I think that might be the best kind of encounter. You're kind of tucked in a hunting stand or a shooting box, elevated off the ground. You can see the whole field. And even when it's half light, you can see everything in those fields. And you clearly saw this thing walk across that bottleneck at the end of the field and step over that barbed wire. So, I mean, it's like you had a theater seat. You got to actually have an encounter and see this thing and confirm its existence in your mind from like a movie theater seat. I think that's awesome. Now, that scream from 100 yards away, I'm assuming that's another one. Either way, man, it's just a great story. You and your son both got to, y'all, are you telling everybody around town what you saw? I bet you're not. I bet you're not. Thanks for the story, Sean. I really appreciate it. These Texas encounters are always good. I don't know. Guys from Texas, they just have a calm way about them, and I could just feel that in this letter. But, Sean, I appreciate it, and hope you guys killed some deer last season. All right, buddy. Here's an email from Marcus. Marcus is a section hiker on the Appalachian Trail. His trail name is Black Tortoise. And here's what he writes. I'm from southwestern Virginia, not southern West Virginia. He says that's a totally different state completely. First, here's some background on me. I consider myself a country boy, and I love being outdoors, going camping, hiking, and backpacking mainly. But I'm also getting into hunting in my adult life. I've been a Bigfoot enthusiast all my life, but my obsession with the subject is relatively recent. With the onset of YouTube, I've watched so many Bigfoot videos I can't even tell you. I was surprised to learn that there are lots of Bigfoot sightings in our area. Since then, after lots of more videos and reading, I have a strong opinion about what Bigfoot are and why no one has ever been able to prove their existence. But I never thought I'd have any confirmation of their existence for myself because I'm not a field researcher. That has changed, though. The following is a true story corroborated by multiple witnesses. I've been a backpacker for about 10 years. It's a real sense of accomplishment to know you've walked umpteen miles with nothing but what you've got on your back. I've got a small crew I run with, and we're slowly section hiking the Appalachian Trail. They call me Black Tortoise, me being slow, brown-skinned, and a country boy. And my hiking companions are Tootie and Camo. None of our spouses backpack, really, so we're a good crew for each other. The first time I heard a Squatch call, the three of us were hiking together, and we came to our shelter for the first evening. I don't like staying in shelters. The hard wooden shelter floors are rough on my back, and I need good sleep if I'm going to have a successful day of hiking the next day. I pitched my two-man Coleman behind the shelter and immediately made my bed and laid down. I was tired. I had a snack, and I was soon dozing off. Tootie and Camo were set up in the lean-to probably 30 feet in front of my tent, and there were two other groups of section hikers staying at and around the shelter that night. One was a group of three guys who all stayed in the shelter, and the other was a couple of middle-aged ladies, presumably in their 50s or 60s. Those girls were tough. One of them had a double knee replacement and was out there making more miles than us. She was impressive. Everyone was fixing dinner and chatting while I was laying quietly in my tent. Downhill from the shelter was a very active creek. It was wide and shallow. So between the conversations, the camp stoves burning loudly to boil water for dinners, and the creek, it was kind of noisy in front of the shelter. I was behind it, so it was easier for me to hear the sounds of the vast woods. In the distance, out on the ridgeline, I hear this call. It's a howl or a hoot. I don't know how to describe it, but it was weird. It was a descending tone, and it was a long duration. I had never heard anything like it. It was far enough away I couldn't hear it very well. There was an airplane going over at cruising altitude, so you had that crackling whisper of a jet engine that was making this mysterious howl as well. At the time, I believed in Bigfoot, but I didn't know if it was completely true, so there was a little skepticism in my thought process. What else could it be, I asked myself, an owl, a coyote? And since then, I've heard owl calls that sound like a Sasquatch. But since there was no way of discerning what was making the sound, I figured I'd never hear it again, and so I relaxed. But I did hear it again. Strangely enough, at the time of the next call, there was more high-atmosphere traffic masking the howl. Is this a coincidence? Or whatever this is purposely waiting for the best time to make a call? I was listening intently, but I think I was so tired that I dozed off. I was sleeping lightly, and the next howl woke me up. It had moved. It was across the creek in front of the shelter and down the trail, coming from where we had been earlier in the day, and this one was loud. It was too long and loud to be a man. A pack of coyotes piped up coming from the same area, yipping and whining. Later, I learned this is sometimes called a shock response. After that, all was quiet and I fell asleep. I didn't dare get out of my tent. I wasn't terrified, but I definitely was a little shocked, and like I said, I'm not one to go investigate or research. But one thing was clear to me at that point. I had heard my first Bigfoot. Frost covered the ground the next morning. It was the first I'd seen that season. We all got up as usual and started making breakfast. I brought up the subject from the previous night's auditory extravaganza with some caution. So did you guys hear that weird howl last night? My hiking companions know that I'm a Bigfoot nut, as we have had innumerable trail and campfire conversations about the subject, dominated by my unceasing ramblings. Marcus, you're a little bit like me, brother. I love to talk about it. So they stayed quiet when the question was posed, but immediately one of the gents with the other group was like, yes, we've been backpacking for 20 years, and we've never heard anything like that. What was it? I was reluctant to say anything immediately, but about that time, one of the ladies in the third group walked up. She said, what are y'all talking about? Oh, that howl last night? Yeah, that was a Bigfoot. And I was like, I'm glad you said it and not me. I also learned that no one had heard the other howls leading up to the loud one, just me and my quiet spot behind the shelter. The rest of our 2-day trip yielded no further incidents except for hard hiking and gorgeous views. But we've had other weird things happen at other spots on the trail. We've heard whoops and whistles and footsteps around the camp in the middle of the night. I just want to know what's out in the woods with me when we're there. Interestingly, the spot we all heard that owl is on the border of 2 Virginia counties, one of which is the county where a man claims to have shot one in the snow on the day before Thanksgiving, and then to have been visited by the men in black after he reported the incident to the local Game and Fish. Bigfoot is out there. You and your listeners stay aware and stay safe, but get out there and enjoy the outdoors. Thank you for letting me share my story. Signed, Marcus. Marcus, that's a great story. And, you guys didn't see anything. It's like Mark Newble says over at Sawdust Beast. Mark is an expert on sound. I don't think he's classically trained in sound identification, but he has spent so much time recording and listening to noises out there, and he knows he has all the information on what a coyote sounds on his graph. When you can see sound on a screen, he knows what a bear sounds like. He knows what a crow sounds like. He knows what a dog sounds like. And Mark says you can't find anything that matches this sound that people record exactly like Marcus is talking about. And then Mark will look at you and he'll go, so what is it? And so Mark knows. And so you heard one of those sounds that Mark Newble would say, it's not anything else in the woods. So what is it? You think it's a Bigfoot. I probably think it is too. Anyway, I appreciate you taking time to send the story to us. And I know everyone enjoyed it. So thanks again, Marcus. All right, that'll wrap up that short video. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. I really appreciate you. Thanks.